Today we're going to be discussing 4 things to keep in mind when hiring a contractor. First, I'm going to warn you of a potentially massive headache you could very easily give yourself when hiring a contractor for the first time. Then, if you stick around after the main lesson is over, I'm going to briefly run you through my main criteria for picking a contractor, how to pay for renovations, and finally, how to budget for renovations. Alright, so why talk about one main point for hiring contractors? I'll tell you a secret, but only if you promise not to tell anyone else. Okay, cool. Because I just did this to myself, and I know if I make a YouTube video about it, I will never forget it again. So, get this. Most banks don't allow withdrawals of more than $5,000. Now, maybe that's just my banks, but I'm pretty sure this is common. Better yet, if you're a millennial like me, you probably don't maintain a traditional checkbook. I used to have one, but I think I tossed it or lost it because I've written fewer checks than years that I have been an adult. So, on this Tuesday, I was supposed to pay my contractor 50% upfront. General contractors of all sizes usually want a substantial down payment for their work. This way, you're covering the cost of materials instead of them having to pay for it. This also proves to them that you can actually afford to hire them. What if, God forbid, Joseph the contractor and his new hire right out of high school, Johnson Jones, did $20,000 worth of work for you, and then you were like, well, I'm kind of broke, but thanks for renovating my kitchens and bathrooms. Ta-ta! No, smaller contractors definitely can't afford that. And even larger contractors would have their profit margins destroyed if they didn't verify that you are a serious buyer. This is the same reason that it's common to put down earnest money or a down payment on a house. Funny thing though, if you don't have a checkbook, you can't write a $10,000 check for your contractor. This means you have to find a bank with a physical location that will cut you a cashier's check or money order and let you pay for it in cash. And in this case, when I say cash, I mean using a debit card. I prefer using credit cards, but for certain kinds of transactions, credit just isn't accepted, and this is one of those things. UPS and the little Western Union in the grocery store will generally only issue money orders up to $500 or $1,000 each, and you're paying a bit less than $1 for every single one of them. So, getting one cashier's check from a bank with a physical location is easier and cheaper. However, beforehand, you're going to need to call your primary bank, the one that gave you the debit card that you're using to buy a cashier's check, and have them raise the limit to something above the cashier's check you need. Because if you make the limit $10,000 and you need a $10,000 cashier's check, it's not gonna work. Because you are then going to have to pay for the cashier's check, making your total more like $10,001. In my case, I rose my withdrawal limit to $15,000 and I only need $10,000. I also recommend you do this the day before, but usually increasing your withdrawal limit will go into effect pretty much immediately. Don't forget to move the funds into your debit card associated checking account about a week prior as well. Because, while some transfers appear same day, you generally want to allot 3 to 5 business days for banks to exchange money with each other. When selecting a contractor, it is most ideal if the contractor, either the head of the contracting company or the handyman service you're hiring, invests in rental real estate or flips houses. Whichever of those two is more important is based on what you are doing with your own properties. This means they'll have a good concept of what works in the local market as well as what return on investment is. Alternatively, contact property management companies to see who handles the touch-up work for their rentals. In my case, I kinda lucked out and I found a guy who matches both of these criteria. The most important thing when paying a contractor is not to pay in full until you have inspected the work. You should be upfront with your contractor about this inspection and tell them to expect a touch-up phase where you walk through the property and request touch-ups or limited redos. If they are told about this beforehand, they won't be bothered when you tell them that this stair rail is still too flimsy or their painter forgot to do the small laundry room in the corner. For instance, I might request not to pay the last third or 20% until I get to inspect the property and request touch-ups. 10% is too low for me though. Most contractors will have already made money at this point, so their incentive to follow through might not be there. However, if you have an established relationship using that same contractor or handyman several times, you can probably afford to do less because the trust is already there. Also, smaller contractors, like an individual or maybe a team of a handful of guys, might need that 90% complete payment instead of 75 or 80% a lot more than bigger companies. So, if you're using a smaller contractor, work with them a little bit. As a general rule of thumb, when renovating a rental property, you don't want the renovations to eat up more than half of your equity. So, if you are buying a house with good bones that, in good condition, would definitely sell for at least $300,000, and you are buying it for $200,000, you need to make sure that the renovations should not exceed $50,000. The catch is, renovations are always going to cost more than what was expected. So, in this example, you would want to make sure your renovations are planned for only $40,000. I like to use 20% as a rule of thumb for renovation costs. I should always keep 20% more cash allotted for renovations than I'm actually expecting the renovations to cost. This is the plan from you before you ask the contractors for their bids, which might then run up to a more accurate price. Worst case scenario, as long as you complete your due diligence, is that it runs even further over and now you're $260,000 into a $300,000 property, which is still good. Please comment below what other topics you'd like to see covered in future videos. I have my own ideas about what I would like to talk about, and I also actually use data analytics to help guide production as well. However, my core subscriber base is the most important factor for what I do next, which means I care what you have to say. Thank you for your time. Have a great day.